The last thing my husband said before the ambulance doors closed wasn't, "I love you." It was, "Margaret, whatever happens, trust my brother." For 35 years, I had trusted Thomas Wilson with every piece of my heart. But his brother Daniel, he was the one person I had spent decades believing could never be trusted. 3 days later, while gathering insurance papers, I found our home safe standing slightly open. Inside wasn't cash or jewelry, it was a stack of documents and a sealed envelope with my name on it. Before I finished reading the first page, I realized the man I'd loved my entire adult life had been hiding something for more than 20 years. If this story makes you wonder what you would have done in my place, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Please like this video. If family stories speak to your heart, subscribe. If you'd like to stay with me until the very end, and leave a comment telling me whether you would have opened that envelope. And before you go on, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. People often tell you that trust is built one day at a time. Looking back now, I think that's true. But I also know it can begin falling apart in a single afternoon. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 62 years old, and until that terrible week, I believed I had one of the strongest marriages anyone could hope for. Thomas and I met when I was 24. He was quiet, polite, and the kind of man who listened more than he talked. While everyone else tried to impress me with expensive dinners or fancy cars, Thomas showed up with homemade chili because he heard I had been working late at the library. That simple meal made me fall in love with him. We married less than a year later. We never became wealthy, but we never needed to be. Thomas worked as a certified public accountant for the same local firm in Columbus, Ohio, for over 3 decades. I spent most of my career working at the public library. We paid our bills. We saved carefully. Every Christmas, we bought exactly one gift we couldn't really afford. Every summer, we drove somewhere new instead of flying. Those little traditions became our riches. Friends often joked that we were boring. Maybe we were. But boring marriages usually survive. Exciting ones don't always. There was one shadow that had followed our marriage from the beginning: Thomas's younger brother, Daniel. Daniel was 5 years younger than Thomas. Where Thomas thought before speaking, Daniel spoke before thinking. Where Thomas balanced every dollar, Daniel chased every new opportunity that promised easy money. He sold used cars, then insurance, then solar panels, then cryptocurrency, then home remodeling. Every Christmas, he seemed to have another business card. Every Thanksgiving, another story about why the last business hadn't worked. I tried to be polite. I truly did. But every conversation with Daniel ended the same way. He needed something. Sometimes it was advice. Sometimes it was a place to stay. Sometimes it was money. Thomas never complained. "He'll figure it out," he'd always tell me. "He's family." I remember one evening, nearly 15 years ago. Daniel had just asked to borrow several $1,000s. Again. After he left, I looked at Thomas across the kitchen table. One day, he's going to stop depending on us. Thomas smiled gently. No, he'll stop depending on me when he learns to depend on himself. I frowned. And when will that happen? Thomas sighed. I don't know. I wasn't angry because Thomas loved his brother. I was angry because love kept costing us. We postponed replacing our old roof. We delayed remodeling the kitchen. We skipped vacations. Every time I suggested spending money on ourselves, Thomas would say we needed to wait a little longer. I assumed he was simply cautious. Now I wonder how many of those decisions had another reason. Still, I never questioned my husband. Not once. Thomas had never lied to me. Not that I knew. If he told me something, I believed him. That kind of trust isn't built overnight. It's built over 35 years of ordinary Tuesdays. Then everything changed. The morning Thomas collapsed in our living room is still frozen inside my memory. One minute he was reading the newspaper. The next, his coffee cup slipped from his hand. His words came out strangely. I knew immediately something was wrong. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Doctors later told me we were lucky. It had been a mild stroke. He was alive, but recovery would take time. Those first days at Riverside Hospital felt endless. Machines beeped. Doctors came and went. Nurses smiled kindly without giving real answers. I barely slept. I sat beside Thomas's bed for hours, holding his hand while he drifted in and out of consciousness. Then Daniel appeared. Every day. Sometimes before I arrived. Sometimes after I left. He brought coffee. He paid for parking. He fixed a broken porch light at my house without being asked. One afternoon, he even mowed my lawn. I stood at the front window watching him push the mower across the yard. He had never done anything like that before. When he finished, he waved awkwardly. "You didn't have to do that," I told him. He shrugged. "You've got enough to worry about." His voice sounded sincere. Too sincere. Instead of making me feel grateful, it made me uncomfortable. People don't change overnight. At least, that's what I believed. The next morning, Daniel met me in the hospital cafeteria. "I brought you breakfast." He slid a paper bag across the table. Inside was my favorite blueberry muffin from the bakery near our house. I stared at it. "How did you know?" Thomas had known for years that I loved those muffins every Saturday morning. Daniel smiled faintly. "Tom told me." Something about that answer bothered me. Why would Thomas suddenly spend time talking about my favorite breakfast with his brother? I couldn't explain why that tiny detail stayed with me. But it did. Later that afternoon, Nurse Kelly stopped me outside Thomas's room. "Your husband was asking for you earlier." My heart jumped. "Is he awake?" "For a few minutes." I hurried inside. Thomas opened his eyes slowly. They were tired, confused. He squeezed my hand. I leaned closer. "I'm here." His lips moved. I expected him to ask about the house, or the dog, or whether I'd eaten lunch. Instead, he whispered something else. "Daniel." I looked toward the door. "What about Daniel?" His eyes searched mine. "Trust." Before he could finish, exhaustion pulled him back to sleep. The nurse gently adjusted his blanket. "It'll take time." I nodded, but inside questions multiplied. Why Daniel? Why not trust the doctors, or the lawyer, or our daughter in Chicago? Why his brother? Driving home that evening, I couldn't stop replaying those words. The streets of Columbus looked the same. Traffic lights changed. Neighbors walked their dogs. Teenagers rode bicycles. The whole world kept moving. Mine had stopped. When I reached our driveway, I noticed something unusual. Daniel's truck was parked beside my garage. He stepped out carrying a toolbox. "I replaced the lock on your back gate," he said. "It wasn't closing right." I hadn't even noticed. "You really don't have to keep doing all this." He smiled sadly. "I know." Then he climbed into his truck and drove away. I watched until his taillights disappeared. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. Maybe I had judged him too harshly all these years. Maybe people really could change. Or maybe he was trying far too hard to earn my trust, and I still didn't know why. The next morning, I returned home from the hospital because I needed Thomas's insurance documents. I had no idea that simple errand was about to change everything I believed about my husband, my marriage, and Daniel Wilson. The house had never felt so quiet. For 35 years, every room carried a piece of Thomas. His reading glasses rested beside his favorite chair. His coffee mug still sat in the sink. The newspaper from the morning he collapsed remained folded on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I kept telling myself I was only home to collect insurance papers. Nothing more. I walked upstairs to our bedroom. The closet door stood half open. Thomas always closed it. Always. I smiled despite everything. Even after all these years, I still noticed the little habits that made him who he was. I reached for the shelf where we kept important documents. The insurance folder wasn't there. Instead, I remembered something. The safe. Thomas kept all our legal papers inside a small fireproof safe hidden behind hanging winter coats. I pushed the coats aside. That's when my heart skipped. The safe door wasn't closed. It was open by less than an inch. Thomas never left it open. Never. For a moment, I wondered if Daniel had been inside the house. Maybe he had needed paperwork while I was at the hospital. Maybe Thomas had opened it before the stroke. I didn't know. I slowly pulled the heavy door open. Inside were several neat stacks of folders. Everything looked organized. That was pure Thomas. Green folders, blue folders, tax returns, insurance policies, property deeds. Nothing unusual. I found the insurance papers almost immediately. I should have closed the safe. I should have gone back to the hospital. Instead, a thick brown envelope caught my attention. My name was written across the front. Margaret. Only my first name. Thomas's handwriting. My fingers froze. The envelope looked old. Not days old. Not weeks old. Years old. Beneath my name were 7 words. If Margaret finds this before I'm ready. I stared at the sentence for what felt like forever. Before I'm ready. Ready for what? Why would my husband prepare a letter he never intended me to read? A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I reached for the envelope, then stopped. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe Thomas intended to explain everything himself. But what if he never recovered enough to tell me that thought changed everything? My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, several folded pages. I placed them on the bed. Before reading, another stack of papers underneath caught my eye. Bank statements. Dozens of them. I almost ignored them. Then one number jumped out. $2,500. Transfer completed. Recipient Daniel Wilson. I frowned. I turned the page. Another transfer. $1,800. Daniel Wilson. Another. $3,000. Daniel Wilson. My breathing slowed. There couldn't be this many. I kept flipping pages, every few months. Sometimes twice in 1 month, year after year. The dates stretched back almost 20 years. I did rough math in my head. 20 years, thousands of dollars, again and again. The total, I didn't even want to calculate it. I felt dizzy. Thomas had always handled our investments. I trusted him completely. We discussed retirement, medical expenses, savings, but never this, never these payments. I whispered aloud, "What is this?" The empty bedroom gave no answer. I kept searching. Every folder seemed to reveal another transfer, another receipt, another signature. Every signature belonged to Thomas. Not once had he mentioned helping Daniel financially after those early loans. Not once. I remembered all the conversations we'd had. We need to wait another year before replacing the windows. We should postpone that vacation. Let's keep saving. How many times had I agreed because I trusted his judgment? How many sacrifices had we made while he quietly sent money elsewhere? I sat down on the edge of the bed. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter. I closed my eyes. No. There had to be another explanation. Thomas wasn't careless with money. He wasn't dishonest. At least, that was the man I thought I knew. I forced myself to continue looking. Near the bottom of the safe sat another folder. This one was labeled only with a date. No name, no explanation. Inside were copies of cashier's checks. Some went to Daniel, others listed only account numbers I didn't recognize. None included notes explaining why. Everything seemed intentionally organized, but also intentionally hidden. That hurt the most. Not the money, the secrecy. I picked up the letter again. Maybe Thomas explained everything there. I unfolded the first page. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this before I've had the courage to tell you myself, then life has taken a path neither of us wanted. I stopped. My eyes filled with tears. It sounded like goodbye. I continued. For years, I've carried a responsibility I never wanted to place on your shoulders. I told myself I was protecting you. Perhaps I was only protecting myself. Protecting himself from what I read faster. There are decisions I've made that I know will hurt you once you discover them. My heart pounded. I'm deeply sorry for every secret I've kept. Secret, not mistake. Secret. The difference mattered. I turned the page. I hope one day you'll understand why I believed silence was the kinder choice. Kinder. I almost laughed. Keeping something hidden for 20 years didn't feel kind. It felt like betrayal. I reached for the next page. There wasn't one. I looked inside the envelope again. Empty. Confused, I counted the sheets. 1, 2, 3. That was all. The sentence at the bottom of page 3 ended halfway through. There is one person who has carried this burden with me and... Nothing. No ending. No explanation. No signature. No final page. I searched inside the safe. Under every folder. Inside every envelope. Nothing. The rest of the letter was gone. Someone had removed it. I stared at the unfinished sentence. One person who has carried this burden with me. My mind immediately supplied the answer. Daniel. Of course. Who else could it be? A wave of anger rose inside me. If Daniel had known everything all these years, if he had accepted money from Thomas, if he had helped hide this from me, then every kind thing he'd done since the stroke suddenly looked different. The hospital visits, the lawn, the muffins, the repairs around the house. Had any of it been kindness or guilt, I folded the letter carefully. For the first time since Thomas and I married, I didn't know whether I truly knew the man I called my husband. The sound of tires crunching across the driveway startled me. I walked to the bedroom window. Daniel's pickup truck had just pulled in. He climbed out carrying 2 grocery bags. He looked up toward the house and smiled. The same warm smile he'd worn every day that week. Only this time, I didn't see kindness. I saw a man who might have spent 20 years helping my husband keep secrets from me. Without thinking, I slipped the bank statements and the unfinished letter back into the envelope. I didn't put them in the safe. Instead, I hid them inside my purse. I needed answers. But one thing had already changed forever. When Daniel knocked on my front door 30 seconds later, I no longer trusted the man standing on the other side. I slipped the envelope deeper into my purse just as the doorbell rang. One ring, then another. Daniel never rang twice, not unless he knew I was home. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. My face gave everything away. Red eyes, tight jaw, fear. I took a deep breath before opening the door. Daniel stood there, holding 2 grocery bags. "I brought soup," he said. "You haven't been eating." His voice sounded exactly like it had every day since Thomas went into the hospital. Gentle, concerned, almost protective. 3 days earlier, I would have thanked him. Now I couldn't stop wondering whether every word coming out of his mouth was another carefully chosen lie. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "I know." He smiled. "But Tom would want someone looking after you." There it was again. Tom would want. Tom asked me. Tom said. Everything seemed to come back to my husband. I stepped aside. "Come in." Daniel walked into the kitchen and placed the groceries on the counter. "I got fresh bread, too." He unpacked everything like he'd done it 100 times. Tomato soup, crackers, milk, coffee, even my favorite tea. He knew too much. Or maybe Thomas had simply told him those things. I hated that my own thoughts no longer trusted simple explanations. Daniel noticed me staring. "You okay?" "I've been better." "I know." His face softened. "This has been hard." Hard. That word almost made me laugh. Hard. He had no idea what hard felt like. Or maybe he did. I looked straight into his eyes. "When was the last time Thomas gave you money?" His hands stopped moving, just for a second. Then he slowly placed the loaf of bread on the counter. "What? You heard me?" Silence filled the kitchen. He looked at me carefully. "What makes you ask that?" I folded my arms. "I asked first." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked away toward the backyard. That tiny movement was enough. He knew exactly what I was talking about. "You've been taking money from him for years." Still nothing. "You've known all along." His shoulders sank. "Margaret, don't." I raised my hand. "Don't lie to me." Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. "I can't talk about this." "You can't." "No." My voice grew louder. "My husband is lying in a hospital bed, and you're telling me you can't explain why he's been secretly sending you thousands of dollars." Daniel closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." Sorry. Not surprised. Not confused. Sorry. The apology hit me harder than any denial could have. "So it's true." He didn't answer. "It really happened." His silence became his confession. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he picked up his truck keys. "I should go." "Oh no." I stepped between him and the front door. "You're not leaving." "I promised Tom." "You promised my husband." "Yes." "And what about me?" His eyes filled with something I couldn't identify. Regret? Pain? Maybe both. "I promised him I'd let him tell you. When he was ready," I almost shouted. "He's been ready for 20 years. Daniel shook his head. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." "I can't." Those 3 words broke something inside me. I reached into my purse and pulled out the unfinished letter. Daniel recognized it immediately. His face lost all color. "You found it." "I found part of it." I held up the last page. "It ends in the middle of a sentence." His breathing changed. He knew. He knew exactly why the pages were missing. "Where are the rest?" He looked at the floor. "Daniel." Still nothing. I stepped closer. "Did you take them?" His silence lasted only a few seconds. It felt like minutes. Finally, "Yes." The room spun. "You actually took them." "I had to." "You had to steal my husband's letter. I wasn't stealing it." "Then what would you call it?" "I was protecting him." The words exploded inside my head. Protecting him. Everyone seemed determined to protect Thomas. Who is protecting me? I've spent 35 years loving that man. I know. I deserve the truth. I know. You had no right. I know. Every answer sounded the same. Quiet, broken, full of guilt, yet he still refused to explain. I slammed the unfinished pages onto the kitchen counter. Tell me why. Daniel stared at the paper. I can't. I am your brother's wife. I know. I have the right to know. You do? Then tell me. His voice barely rose above a whisper. If I tell you, I'll break the promise I made him. I laughed bitterly. And what about the promise he made me when we got married? Daniel looked like I had slapped him. For the first time, I saw tears gathering in his eyes. He turned away. I had never seen Daniel cry. Not when his first marriage ended. Not when his business failed. Not even at his parents' funeral. Now he struggled just to breathe. I'm trying to do the right thing. His voice cracked. I really am. I stared at him. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part remembered every bank statement hidden inside that safe. 20 years. 20 years of lies. You've been living off my husband. His head snapped toward me. No. I saw the transfers. You don't know what they were. Then tell me. I can't. Again, always the same answer. I pointed toward the front door. You should leave. He didn't move. I said leave. Instead, he slowly reached into his jacket pocket. For one hopeful second, I thought he might pull out the missing pages. Instead, he removed a folded photograph. He stared at it before placing it back into his pocket. Whatever it was, he changed his mind. Another secret, another mystery. You'll hate me today, he said quietly. I understand that. But someday, he stopped himself. I noticed. He almost said more. What? He shook his head. Nothing. No. I stepped closer. You were going to say something. He swallowed hard. Someday, you'll know why Tom asked you to trust me. There it was again. Trust me. How could I trust someone who admitted hiding part of my husband's letter? You've given me every reason not to. I know. He walked toward the front door. Before leaving, he turned around one last time. Please don't ask Tom about any of this yet. I stared at him in disbelief. You expect me to keep quiet? He's recovering. He's my husband. I know. If he wakes up remembering everything, I'm asking him every question. Daniel nodded slowly. I figured you would. Then he opened the door. One more thing. He paused. Everything you're thinking isn't what really happened. With that, he left. I watched his truck disappear down the street. His final words echoed through the silent house. Everything you're thinking isn't what really happened. Maybe. But he had given me nothing else to believe. That evening, I returned to the hospital. Thomas was still asleep. I sat beside him holding his hand. His wedding ring felt warm against my fingers. I searched his face for answers. The man lying before me looked exactly like the husband I'd loved for 35 years. Kind, gentle, honest. Yet hidden inside my purse were documents proving he'd concealed thousands of dollars in payments. And hidden somewhere else were the missing pages that could explain everything. Or destroy everything. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw three things: the unfinished letter, the bank transfers, Daniel's face when he admitted taking the missing pages. By sunrise, I had convinced myself of one thing. If Thomas couldn't answer my questions, that letter would. I drove home before visiting the hospital. The envelope was exactly where I had hidden it inside my dresser drawer. I carried it to the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee. The house felt colder than usual. Outside, neighbors walked their dogs. A delivery truck rolled slowly down the street. Life continued, as though nothing had changed. Mine had changed completely. I spread the 3 pages across the table. This time, I forced myself to read every word carefully. Not as an angry wife, as someone searching for the truth. The first paragraph was the same. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this before I've had the courage to tell you myself, then life has taken a path neither of us wanted. The second paragraph sounded different now. Less like an apology, more like a confession. For years I've carried a responsibility I never wanted to place on your shoulders. Responsibility, not affair, not crime. Responsibility. I underlined the word with my finger. Had I misunderstood everything I kept reading? I've asked myself 1,000 times whether honesty would have been kinder than silence. That sentence stopped me. Thomas had always believed honesty mattered. It was one of the reasons I married him. If he struggled that much, whatever he hid had to be enormous. The next lines hurt even more. You deserved the truth long ago. Yes, I whispered it aloud. I did. You trusted me more than anyone ever has. Another tear landed on the page. I know I have failed that trust. Those words felt genuine. Thomas wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming anyone. He blamed himself. Still, he wasn't telling me what he had done. I turned to the final page again. I hope one day you'll understand why I believed silence was the kinder choice. Then came the unfinished sentence. There is one person who has carried this burden with me and... Nothing. No ending, no explanation, no name. I stared at the blank space below the sentence. Someone had deliberately removed the remaining pages. Not accidentally. Cleanly. Carefully. That meant whoever removed them knew exactly what they contained. Daniel. My thoughts returned to him immediately. Then another possibility entered my mind. What if Thomas himself had removed them? Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he wasn't ready. I hated how every answer created 2 new questions. I folded the pages again. Something inside the envelope brushed against my fingertips. I frowned. Had that been there yesterday, I turned the envelope upside down. A small white card slipped onto the table. I hadn't noticed it before. It was no larger than a business card. Only one sentence was written on it. If anything happens before I can explain, Rebecca will know what to do. Rebecca Hayes, Thomas's attorney. We'd known her for nearly 20 years. She had prepared our wills, handled our retirement paperwork. She wasn't just our lawyer. She had become a trusted friend. Why hadn't I thought about her sooner if anyone knew the truth? Maybe it was Rebecca. I looked at the clock. 9:15. Her office opened at 9. I picked up my phone, then hesitated. What would I even say, hello, Rebecca? Did my husband secretly send thousands of dollars to his brother while lying to me for 20 years? It sounded insane. Still, I dialed. Her assistant answered. Good morning, Hayes Legal. This is Margaret Wilson. Mrs. Wilson. Her voice softened immediately. We've been thinking about you. How is Tom recovering? I'm glad to hear that. I was hoping to speak with Rebecca. One moment. The hold music seemed to last forever. Finally, Rebecca answered. Margaret, Her voice sounded warm. I'm so sorry about everything. Thank you. How's Tom doing today? Better. There was a pause. I actually need to ask you something. Of course. I found something in our safe. Silence. Only 2 seconds, but I heard it. Rebecca didn't respond immediately. My heart began beating faster. I found documents. Still silence. Then she spoke very carefully. What kind of documents? Bank transfers. Another pause. This one lasted longer. Finally, she sighed quietly. I wondered if this day might come. My stomach tightened. So you know. I know some things. You knew Thomas was hiding money from me. Margaret. No, I interrupted. Please don't protect him. I'm not. Then tell me. I can't discuss my client's private affairs. My frustration exploded. I'm his wife. I know. I've shared every part of my life with that man. I know. I deserve answers. You do. Then give them to me. Rebecca lowered her voice. There are legal limits on what I can disclose. Legal. The word caught my attention. Legal meant whatever Thomas had done wasn't necessarily illegal. It involved legal documents, trusts, estate planning, something official, not cash hidden under a mattress. I forced myself to calm down. Can you at least tell me one thing? I'll answer if I can. Did Thomas break the law? Rebecca answered immediately. No. Not even a second of hesitation. The certainty surprised me. So everything was legal? Yes. Did he steal from me? No. Again, immediate, firm. That answer shook my assumptions. If Thomas hadn't stolen our money, then what exactly had those transfers been? I leaned back in my chair. Then why hide them? Rebecca hesitated. I can't answer that. Is Daniel involved? Another pause. I can't answer that either. I closed my eyes. Every conversation seemed to end exactly the same way. Nobody denied anything. Nobody explained anything. Rebecca spoke gently. Margaret. Yes, Tom loved you more than anyone I've ever represented. My eyes filled again. I know. No, she corrected softly. I don't think you do. What does that mean? I wish I could tell you. But I can't. I almost gave up. Then she added something unexpected. There is one thing I can say. I sat forward. I'm listening. When you look at those bank records, don't assume you know who actually benefited from that money. The sentence confused me. What does that mean? I can't explain. Rebecca? I'm sorry. Please. I've already said more than I probably should have. She sounded genuinely torn. Before hanging up, she said one final sentence. Don't let anger convince you that you've already solved the mystery. The line went silent. I remained sitting at the kitchen table for several minutes. Rebecca hadn't answered my questions, but she had destroyed one certainty. I had believed every dollar went to Daniel. Now, I wasn't sure anymore. I pulled the stack of transfers from my purse again. For the first time, I stopped looking only at Daniel's name. Instead, I began studying every account number, every routing number, every memo line. And halfway through the pile, I noticed something I had completely missed before. Several payments did not go to Daniel at all. They were transferred into an account identified only by a trust number. No name, no beneficiary, just a trust account. I counted them. There were dozens, maybe more. My heartbeat quickened. Whatever this trust was, it had been hidden just as carefully as everything else. And somehow, I knew it held the next piece of the puzzle. The trust account changed everything. Until that moment, I believed I understood the story. Thomas had secretly given money to Daniel. Daniel had hidden the truth. Case closed. Now I wasn't sure of anything. I spread every bank statement across the dining room table. The transfers to Daniel were obvious. His name appeared clearly. But every few months there was another payment. Same amount, same bank, different destination. Just a trust account number. No name, no explanation. I grabbed a yellow legal pad and started making notes. Date, amount, recipient. After nearly an hour, a pattern appeared. Thomas almost always sent money to Daniel first. Then within a day or two, another payment went into the trust. Sometimes the amounts were nearly identical. Sometimes they weren't. But they moved together. That couldn't be a coincidence. I checked my watch. It was almost noon. The hospital could wait another hour. I needed answers. I drove straight to the downtown branch of our bank. The lobby looked exactly as it always had. Marble floors, soft music, people waiting quietly. I had banked there for almost 30 years. The manager, Mr. Collins, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Wilson." He stood to shake my hand. "I'm so sorry to hear about Tom." "Thank you. What can I do for you today?" "I have questions about some old transactions." He invited me into his office. Once the door closed, I laid several statements on his desk. "I need to understand these." He adjusted his glasses. His eyes moved across the pages. After a few seconds, he looked up. "These are joint account records." "Yes." "So you're authorized to discuss them?" "Good." I pointed toward Daniel's transfers. "My husband sent these." Mr. Collins nodded. "Yes." "Did Daniel withdraw them?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss another customer's account." I expected that answer. I pointed at the trust account. "What about this?" His expression changed, only slightly, but I noticed. "Can you tell me what this trust is?" "I'm sorry. I cannot." "Can you tell me if it's legal?" "Absolutely." His answer came immediately. There was nothing improper about these transactions. That sounded exactly like Rebecca. Nothing improper. Nothing illegal. I leaned forward. Was my husband being manipulated? I can't answer that. Was he under pressure? I can't answer that either. Every answer seemed carefully measured. I decided to try another approach. Did Thomas ever seem unwilling to make these transfers? Mr. Collins thought for a moment. Then he surprised me. No. He always appeared certain. Certain. That word stayed with me. Not forced. Not frightened. Certain. Thomas had chosen this. I thanked Mr. Collins and left. Outside, the July sun felt almost too bright. I sat inside my car without starting the engine. If Thomas acted willingly, then he truly believed whatever he was doing was right. That frightened me even more. Instead of driving to the hospital, I made one more stop. The county records office. It sounded ridiculous. I didn't even know exactly what I was looking for. But Thomas had taught me something years ago. When paperwork exists, he'd often say, "There's always a trail." So I followed the trail. The clerk helped me search public records connected to the trust number. After several minutes, she frowned. "This isn't public." I figured. But she clicked her keyboard again. "There is one document." My heart skipped. "What kind?" "A trust registration." "Can I see it?" She printed a single page. Most of the information had been legally restricted. Names were blacked out, addresses hidden. Only a few details remained visible. Date established, 21 years ago. Trust type, irrevocable, attorney of record, Rebecca Hayes. I stared at the page. 21 years, exactly when the mysterious transfers had started. Whatever happened, It had happened more than 2 decades earlier. I folded the document carefully. By the time I reached the hospital, visiting hours had already begun. Thomas was awake. For the first time since his stroke, he looked more alert. His eyes found mine immediately. "Margaret." His voice was weak, but clear. I smiled despite everything. "Hi." He squeezed my hand. "You look tired." I almost laughed. "So do you." A faint smile crossed his face. For a few precious seconds, everything felt normal again. Then he asked the question I wasn't prepared for. "Has Daniel been helping you?" There it was again. Daniel. Always Daniel. "Yes." Thomas nodded with relief. "Good." I searched his face. "Why is that so important?" His smile faded. He looked confused. "As long as you trust him?" His voice drifted away. I leaned closer. "Why?" He frowned. His eyes searched the room as if trying to remember something. Nothing." He shook his head slowly. "I can't remember." The frustration on his face broke my heart. He genuinely couldn't remember. I wasn't looking at a husband hiding a secret. I was looking at a frightened man fighting his own mind. Nurse Kelly stepped inside. "5 more minutes, Mrs. Wilson." I nodded. When she left, I lowered my voice. "Tom." He looked at me. I found the safe. His entire body became still. Not panicked, just still. "The safe? Yes. I found your letter." His breathing slowed. For one long moment, he stared at the ceiling. Then tears formed in his eyes. "I'm sorry." The words barely escaped his lips. "You weren't supposed to." "I know." "I'm sorry." He wasn't asking what I'd read. He wasn't denying anything. He simply apologized. I wanted to ask everything. What happened? Why Daniel? Who's the trust for? Why lie to me? Instead, I asked only one question. "Did you ever stop loving me?" His answer came without hesitation. "Never." His voice cracked. Not for 1 second. I believed him. Strangely, that made everything harder, because love was never the question. Trust was. Before I could ask anything else, he suddenly looked frightened. His eyes darted toward the doorway. "Daniel." "What about him?" His breathing quickened. "Don't." His forehead wrinkled with effort. "Don't blame." He stopped again. The words disappeared. His memory slipped away as quickly as it had returned. Nurse Kelly walked back inside. "Time for your therapy session." I kissed Thomas's forehead. "I'll come back later." As I reached the hallway, I almost collided with Daniel. He had clearly just arrived. He carried a paper cup of coffee in one hand. When he saw my face, he knew something had changed. "You talked to him?" "Yes." Daniel looked nervous. "What did he say?" I stared at him for several seconds. "He told me not to blame you." Daniel closed his eyes for just a moment, as though those words carried enormous weight. When he opened them again, I noticed something I had never seen before. Relief. Not because the secret was safe, but because Thomas had remembered enough to protect him. That single expression told me one thing with absolute certainty. Daniel wasn't protecting himself anymore. He was protecting someone else. I just didn't know who. I stood in the hospital hallway long after Daniel walked away. His expression haunted me. It wasn't the look of a man protecting himself. It was the look of someone carrying a punishment that never ended. For the first time since opening, the safe doubt crept into my anger. Had I been asking the wrong questions? Not, "What did Daniel do?" But what had happened to make Thomas spend 21 years protecting him? I wasn't ready to forgive anyone, but I was ready to hear the truth. The problem was that no one seemed willing to tell me. I decided that would change. The next afternoon, I called Daniel. "I want to meet." His voice sounded cautious. "Where? The park on Riverside Drive? The one near the river?" "Yes." "I'll be there." Neither of us said goodbye. When I arrived, Daniel was already sitting on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the water. He looked older than I remembered, not because of gray hair, because of exhaustion. He stood when he saw me. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I almost didn't. We sat several feet apart. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "I'm tired." "So am I." "I'm tired of secrets." He nodded. "I know. I'm giving you one chance." He looked at me. "One. If you leave today without answering me, I don't know if I'll ever speak to you again." His shoulders dropped. "I understand." I reached into my purse and placed the unfinished letter between us. "You took the missing pages." "Yes." "You admitted it." "Yes." "You've known this secret for over 20 years?" "Yes." Every answer came quietly, without excuses, without arguments. "So, tell me." He stared at the river. "I can't tell you everything." Anger flashed through me again. "There it is. I can tell you some things." I waited. His voice became almost a whisper. "I've spent 21 years wishing I could go back." I frowned. "Go back to what?" He rubbed both hands together. "One night." "What happened that night?" He closed his eyes. "I made the worst decision of my life." I felt my heartbeat quicken. Finally, we were getting somewhere. "What kind of decision?" "I can't tell you everything." I stood up. "You promised." "I promised to tell you something." "Not riddles." He looked desperate. "I'm trying." "Then try harder." Daniel covered his face with both hands. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. "I hurt someone." The words landed heavily between us. I froze. "Hurt someone." He nodded. "A long time ago." "Who?" "I can't say." "Why?" "Because it isn't only my story." That answer irritated me. Everything seems to belong to someone else's story. I know. No one seems to care that it's become mine too. He lowered his head. I do care. Then stop protecting everyone. I'm not protecting everyone. Then who? He looked directly into my eyes. I'm protecting your husband. The answer caught me off guard. Thomas. Yes. From what? From breaking the promise he made. I frowned. What promise? Daniel shook his head. I've already said too much. I laughed bitterly. You've barely said anything. He reached into his pocket. Slowly, carefully. My heart raced. This time he pulled out the photograph I'd seen at my house. He held it in his hands for several seconds before offering it to me. I shouldn't. But maybe this will help. I took it. The picture was old, faded, at least 20 years old. 3 men stood together. Thomas, Daniel, and a young man I had never seen before. The stranger looked no older than 20. His right arm rested inside a sling. One side of his face showed faint scars. Despite the injuries, he was smiling. I looked back at Daniel. Who is he? Daniel swallowed. I can't tell you. I stared at him in disbelief. You just handed me a photograph. I know. With a stranger. I know. But you still won't tell me who he is. I can't. My patience finally snapped. I shoved the photograph back into his hands. I don't understand you. You don't have to. I've defended my husband for 35 years. I know. I've doubted my own judgment because of you. I know. And you're still asking me to trust you? His answer came quietly. No. I'm asking you to trust Tom. There it was again. Always Thomas. Always the same request. Trust Tom. Trust Daniel. Trust the silence. I couldn't do it anymore. I turned to leave. Behind me, Daniel spoke one sentence. I never kept $1. I stopped walking. Slowly, I turned around. What, the money? He took a shaky breath. I never kept it. I stared at him. Every transfer, every bank statement, every payment. What are you talking about? I wasn't the final destination. The words echoed in my head. Rebecca had hinted at that. Now Daniel confirmed it. You mean, the money didn't stay with me? Then where did it go? He closed his eyes. I can't answer that. I almost screamed. You've got to be kidding me. I'm sorry. No, you aren't. If you were sorry, you'd tell me. He stood. I've lived every day wishing I could. His voice cracked. You think you've suffered this week? I've suffered every day for 21 years. Those words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded real, painfully real. He looked older than 60, not from age, from guilt. I wanted to hate him. Part of me still did, but another part saw something different. This wasn't a man enjoying a secret. This was a man trapped inside one. Before leaving, he placed the photograph on the bench beside me. Keep it. I don't want it. You will. He walked away. I watched him disappear down the path. Then I picked up the picture again. This time, I studied the stranger more carefully. There was something familiar. Not his face. His jacket. A logo stitched over the pocket. Westbrook High School. I knew that school. It was only 15 minutes from our house. Why would Thomas and Daniel be standing beside an injured young man from Westbrook High? Over 20 years ago, I flipped the photograph over. On the back, someone had written a date. October 12th, 21 years earlier. Nothing else. No names, no explanation. Just a date. As I slipped the picture into my purse, my phone rang. It was Rebecca. Her voice sounded urgent. Margaret. Yes. I need to ask you something. What is it? Did Daniel give you anything today? I looked at the photograph. Yes. She sighed. I was afraid of that. Why? Because if he gave you that picture, then he's getting closer to breaking the promise he made to Thomas. My heart began pounding again. What promise? Rebecca hesitated. Then she said the one sentence that changed everything. Margaret, the man in that photograph is the reason your husband asked you to trust his brother. I drove home with the photograph lying on the passenger seat. I couldn't stop looking at it. 3 men, Thomas, Daniel, a young stranger with a sling on his arm. Rebecca's words repeated in my mind. The man in that photograph is the reason your husband asked you to trust his brother. The reason. Not part of the reason. The reason. I pulled into my driveway, but didn't get out immediately. Instead, I picked up the picture one more time. The young man's smile bothered me. Not because it looked fake, because it looked genuine. How could someone smile beside the 2 men who had turned my life upside down? Unless he didn't hate them. That possibility unsettled me more than anything else. I walked inside and spread everything across the dining room table again. The photograph, the unfinished letter, the bank statements, the trust account records, the page from the county office. For the first time, I stopped trying to prove Thomas guilty. Instead, I asked myself a different question. What story explains all of this? Every possibility I imagined eventually fell apart. If Daniel had stolen from Thomas, why would Thomas keep helping him? If Thomas had been blackmailed, why did the bank manager insist every payment was made willingly? If the young man was a victim, why was he smiling beside them? Nothing fit. I looked at the calendar. October 12th. The date written on the back of the photograph. 21 years ago. I walked into my home office and turned on my old desktop computer. Thomas always teased me for keeping it. You know laptops exist. I like a real keyboard, I'd answer. That old computer held decades of family photos, scanned documents, and newspaper clippings. Maybe, just maybe, something from 21 years ago remained? I searched October. Nothing. Then the year. Hundreds of files appeared. Vacation photos, Christmas dinner, our daughter's college graduation. Then I found something unexpected. A folder named simply Insurance. Inside were scanned copies of old claim forms. Most involved ordinary things. Storm damage, a broken water heater, car insurance renewals. Then one document stopped me. Vehicle accident claim, October, 21 years ago. My heart began racing. I opened it. Most of the information had been blurred during scanning, but one sentence remained readable. Claim closed after private settlement. Private settlement, I frowned. Thomas had never mentioned a car accident. Neither had Daniel. I searched for more pages. There weren't any. Someone had scanned only the cover sheet. I leaned back slowly. A private settlement, an injured young man. 21 years of payments? The pieces were beginning to move toward each other. But they still didn't connect. My phone buzzed. It was Nurse Kelly. Mrs. Wilson. Yes. Your husband has been asking for you. I'll be there. He seems more alert today. I'll leave right now. During the drive to the hospital, I rehearsed dozens of questions, but when I entered Thomas's room, they all disappeared. He looked tired, older, yet more like himself than he had since the stroke. He smiled weakly. There you are. I took his hand. I'm here. He squeezed my fingers. I've been trying to remember. My heart skipped. What? He closed his eyes. It keeps coming? What does... The memories. I leaned closer. What do you remember? His forehead tightened. The road. I froze. The road. He nodded slowly. It was raining. My breathing became shallow. Rain, road, car accident. Before I could ask another question, Thomas pressed 2 fingers against his temple. It slips away. What slips away? Everything after that. He looked frustrated. I almost had it. I gently rubbed his shoulder. It's okay. No. He shook his head. It's not. His voice cracked. You deserve answers. The words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell him everything I'd discovered. The safe, the trust, the photograph. Instead, I asked quietly, Tom, were you driving? He looked confused. What? The night it was raining? His eyes widened slightly. Then, nothing. The confusion returned. I don't know. I realized he truly didn't. His damaged memory wasn't pretending. Pieces came. Pieces disappeared. He reached toward the bedside table. There was something... What? A letter. I felt my stomach tighten. The letter... I was writing it. Yes, so you would know. His voice became faint. I didn't want... Again he stopped. The sentence dissolved before it finished. Tears filled his eyes. I can't find it. I held his hand tighter. It's okay. No, he whispered. It's not okay anymore. At that moment, Daniel quietly stepped into the room. He stopped the instant he saw Thomas awake. Thomas looked toward him. For several seconds, the brothers simply stared at each other. Neither spoke. Then Thomas whispered, "I'm sorry." Daniel immediately shook his head. "No. It isn't your fault." Those words surprised me. "Not your fault." I watched Daniel carefully. He walked to the opposite side of the bed. He looked at Thomas with a tenderness I'd never noticed before. "You kept your promise." Daniel's voice trembled. "You kept it for 21 years. Thomas closed his eyes. "I couldn't." "You did." Daniel smiled sadly. "You carried it longer than anyone should." I felt invisible. The conversation sounded like two people speaking a language only they understood. Finally, I interrupted. "What promise?" Both men looked at me. Neither answered. I stood up. "I'm done listening to half a conversation." Thomas looked heartbroken. Daniel looked trapped. "I deserve the truth." Thomas slowly reached for my hand again. "I know." "Then tell me." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Not because he refused, because he couldn't remember. The effort exhausted him. His breathing quickened. Nurse Kelly hurried inside. "That's enough for today." She looked at me kindly. "He needs to rest." I nodded and stepped into the hallway. A minute later, Daniel joined me. He closed the hospital room door behind him. For several seconds, we stood without speaking. Finally, he reached into his wallet. He removed a folded newspaper clipping. He held it in his hand, but didn't let go. "You should probably have this." I looked down. The headline was partially visible. "Local man injured in late-night crash." My pulse raced. I reached for it. Daniel hesitated, then finally released it. I unfolded the yellowed clipping. The article had been carefully cut from the newspaper decades earlier. Halfway down the page, one sentence jumped out at me. "The identity of the driver has not been released." I looked up at Daniel. My voice barely worked. "Who was driving that car?" Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time since all of this began, he answered with complete honesty. "I wasn't the one behind the wheel." "I wasn't the one behind the wheel?" Daniel's words stayed with me all night. If he hadn't been driving, then who had the answer seemed obvious. Thomas. But my heart refused to believe it. The Thomas I knew never drove recklessly. He never drank. He always wore a seatbelt. He slowed down in heavy rain. Yet 21 years earlier, something had happened that changed 3 lives forever. And somehow, my husband had spent decades paying for it. The next morning, I called Rebecca again. This time, I didn't ask for explanations. I asked for facts. "I know there was a car accident." She was quiet for several seconds. Finally, she said, "Come to my office." That alone told me everything had changed. Rebecca had refused every meeting before. Now she wanted to see me in person. When I arrived, she closed the door herself. She didn't offer coffee. She didn't make small talk. She simply placed a thin folder on her desk. "I can tell you only what Tom authorized me to reveal if he became unable to explain it himself." I stared at the folder. "So, he planned for this?" Rebecca nodded. "He prayed this day would never come." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was only one page. No dramatic confession, no hidden fortune, Just a typed summary. Rebecca pointed to the first paragraph. Read it. I did. 21 years ago, Daniel was involved in a serious automobile accident that left another young man critically injured. I stopped. Daniel was involved. Rebecca nodded. But he wasn't driving? Correct. My pulse quickened. So why has everyone blamed Daniel? No one has. I did. Rebecca looked at me with kindness. You filled in the blanks yourself. She was right. Every assumption had been mine. I continued reading. Following the accident, Thomas accepted personal responsibility for ensuring the injured young man received lifelong support if necessary. I frowned. Personal responsibility? Why? Rebecca folded her hands. Keep reading. The next paragraph explained that all financial arrangements had been created voluntarily. No court had ordered them. No lawsuit forced them. Everything had been agreed upon privately. Private settlement? I whispered. Rebecca nodded. The newspaper clipping. You found it. I looked up. Why would Tom voluntarily do that? Rebecca's expression softened. Because he believed it was morally right. I shook my head. This still doesn't make sense. It won't. Not yet. I leaned forward. Was Thomas driving? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked me something unexpected. Margaret, in 35 years of marriage, how many times did Tom ever refuse to take responsibility for something? I smiled sadly. Never. Exactly. She slid the folder toward me. Whether or not something was legally his fault, Tom believed responsibility and blame were not always the same thing. Those words settled heavily inside me. Responsibility, not blame. The same word Thomas had used in his unfinished letter. I suddenly realized he had never written, I've hidden my guilt. He had written, I've carried a responsibility. I had treated those words as if they meant the same thing. Maybe they didn't. I looked back at Rebecca. What happened after the accident? The young man survived. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He recovered. Not quickly. But yes. Did Tom know him? Rebecca nodded once. Very well. My mind raced. The photograph was taken months later. So they stayed in touch? They did. I looked down at the folder again. There has to be more. There is. But that part belongs to Tom. Frustration rose again. He's trying to remember. I know. And if he never does? Rebecca's eyes grew moist. He hoped he would never have to let anyone else tell this story. I closed the folder. So Daniel has been carrying this secret too. For 21 years. And the money? Rebecca smiled faintly. I can answer that now. I sat perfectly still. The payments sent to Daniel did not stay with Daniel. I know that. He transferred every dollar exactly where Tom instructed. So Daniel never kept any of it? Not 1 cent. I felt ashamed. For days, I had imagined him taking advantage of my husband, living comfortably because of Thomas. That picture was completely wrong. What about the trust? Rebecca finally answered. The trust exists solely for the benefit of the young man injured in the accident. I stared at her. The room became silent. Every mysterious payment, every missing dollar, every postponed vacation, every delayed home repair, they had all gone to support one person, not Daniel, someone else, someone Thomas believed deserved help. I whispered, Does Daniel contribute too? Rebecca nodded. He has for years. That answer hit me harder than anything else. Daniel, the man I had judged for decades, the man I believed had been taking, had actually been giving. Maybe not as much as Thomas, but giving, quietly, without recognition, without defending himself. I thought back to our conversation in the park. I've suffered every day for 21 years. For the first time, I believed him. I left Rebecca's office more confused than ever, but one certainty had disappeared forever. Daniel was not the villain I had imagined. As I drove toward the hospital, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. "Hello." A calm, male voice answered. "Mrs. Wilson?" "Yes, my name is Ethan Carter." Every muscle in my body tightened. I knew that name, not because anyone had told me, because it was printed on the last page of Rebecca's folder as the trustee's beneficiary. The young man, the injured man, the one whose life had somehow become connected to ours forever. He continued gently. "Rebecca told me you might have questions." I couldn't speak. "I think it's finally time we met." I agreed to meet Ethan Carter the following afternoon. He suggested a small coffee shop on the west side of Columbus. "I'll be in the back," he said over the phone. "You'll recognize me before I recognize you." Those words stayed with me all morning. For 21 years, this man had lived somewhere beyond the edges of my life. Thomas knew him, Daniel knew him, Rebecca knew him. Only I had been left in the dark. When I walked into the cafe, I immediately noticed a man standing as I entered. He looked to be around 40, tall, calm. A gentle smile crossed his face. His right hand reached for a cane before taking a few careful steps toward me. Not because he couldn't walk, because walking still required extra effort. I suddenly remembered the sling in the old photograph, the scars, the accident. "You must be Margaret." His voice was warm. "I'm Ethan." We shook hands. His grip was firm. Nothing about him suggested bitterness. That surprised me more than anything. We ordered coffee and sat near the window. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had consumed me for days. "Were you the young man in that photograph?" He smiled softly. "Yes. I was 20 years old." I took a slow breath. I've spent the last week believing I understood my husband's secret. And now I realize I understood almost nothing. Ethan nodded. "I expected that." "You know why Thomas hid everything." "I do." "You know why Daniel wouldn't talk." "I do." My chest tightened. "Then please, don't protect them anymore." He looked out the window for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no anger. "Thomas protected me." Those 4 words stopped me cold. "I don't understand." "You will." He folded his hands together. "The night of the accident changed all of our lives." "I know." "You know part of it." "I know Daniel wasn't driving." "That's true." I waited. Ethan continued. "When I woke up in the hospital, I was angry. I couldn't move my right arm. My leg was broken. I thought my future had disappeared." He paused. "I wanted someone to blame." "Did you?" "At first." I leaned forward. "What happened then? The day after surgery?" "Thomas came to see me." My eyebrows lifted. "Not Daniel?" "No. Thomas." He introduced himself. He didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply said, "I'm here because someone has to make this right." I stared at Ethan. Those words sounded exactly like Thomas. Not defensive, not dramatic, simply responsible. "What did he mean?" He meant exactly what he said. Ethan smiled faintly. He visited every week. For years. I blinked. Years? Yes. He brought books. Homework when I returned to college. Sometimes groceries. Sometimes nothing at all. Just conversation. My throat tightened. Why? Ethan shrugged gently. You'd have to ask him. I tried. He doesn't remember. Ethan's smile faded. I'm sorry. So am I. I looked at his cane. Did Thomas pay your medical bills? Some of them. Not all, no. My insurance covered part. The settlement covered the rest. Settlement. There was that word again. The trust. Ethan nodded. I wondered when you'd ask. I took out the copies of the bank statements from my purse. I found these. He looked at them, then smiled. I've seen those account numbers many times. So the trust was yours? Yes. My hands trembled. For 21 years? Yes. I looked down at the papers. Every payment, every sacrifice, every delayed vacation, every dollar. It hadn't been supporting Daniel. It had been supporting this quiet man sitting across from me. I whispered, Thomas never told me. I know. Why? Ethan answered without hesitation. Because he didn't want me to feel like charity. That answer broke my heart. It sounded exactly like my husband. He had never helped people to be praised. He helped because he believed it was right. Still, one question remained. Did Daniel contribute too? Ethan smiled. Every month. I closed my eyes. All those years I had judged Daniel. Called him irresponsible. Thought he was draining our savings. In reality, he had quietly been adding his own money. I opened my eyes again. Why didn't either of you tell me? Ethan looked genuinely sad. Thomas made us promise. He said one day, when he retired, he would explain everything himself. The unfinished letter, the missing pages, everything suddenly fit together. He never got the chance. No. Silence settled between us. Then Ethan reached into his messenger bag. I've got something for you. He handed me a thick envelope. What is this? Letters. From Thomas. I stared at him. There are dozens. He wrote to me every Christmas. He also kept copies. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were handwritten notes. Short, simple. One caught my eye immediately. Dear Ethan, I hope your students know how lucky they are. You once told me you wanted to become a teacher. Seeing you live that dream reminds me that one terrible night doesn't have to define an entire life. Merry Christmas. Tom. Tears blurred my vision. You became a teacher. Ethan smiled proudly. High school history. I laughed softly through my tears. Thomas always loved history. I know. He used to recommend books. So he really knew you. Oh yes. I looked through several more letters. Not one mentioned guilt. Not one mentioned obligation. Instead, they talked about life, teaching, books, fishing, baseball. They sounded like letters between old friends, not between a victim and someone paying a debt. Finally, I asked the question I had avoided. Have you forgiven them? Ethan answered before I finished speaking. I forgave them years ago. The accident wasn't the end of my life. It changed it. But it wasn't the end. I struggled to understand. If you've forgiven them, why keep accepting the money? He smiled gently. I stopped years ago. I frowned. What? The trust still exists. But I haven't taken money from it in a long time. What happens to it now? It keeps growing. I stared at him. Growing? I asked Thomas to stop. He refused, so we compromised. The money stayed invested. For scholarships. I felt my breath catch. Scholarships. For students recovering from serious injuries. I couldn't speak. Thomas hadn't simply helped one man. He had quietly helped strangers too. Without telling anyone. Without seeking recognition. Without even telling me. As we stood to leave, Ethan placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. Margaret. There is one thing I want you to know. I looked at him. I never saw your husband as the man who ruined my life. I saw him as the man who refused to let one terrible night ruin any more lives. I barely made it home before someone knocked on my front door. 3 slow knocks, not hurried, not uncertain. I already knew who it was. Daniel. When I opened the door, he wasn't carrying groceries. He wasn't carrying tools. He held only a worn brown envelope. His eyes looked exhausted. I think it's time. I didn't invite him inside. He lifted the envelope. You should have these. I stared at it. My heart already knew what it contained. The missing pages? He nodded once. All of them. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside. Come in. We sat across from each other at the same dining room table where I had first opened Thomas's unfinished letter. Daniel placed the envelope between us. He didn't touch it again. I've carried this in my truck for 3 days. Why? Because I kept hoping Tom would wake up and tell you himself. I looked at him carefully. And now? He lowered his eyes. I don't think that's fair to either of you anymore. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside were 4 handwritten pages. The missing ending. The answers I'd been chasing since opening the safe. Before I unfolded them, I looked at Daniel. I need to ask one thing. He nodded. If these pages explain everything, why hide them at all? He took a long breath. Because Tom begged me. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I was to wait. Wait for what? For him to be able to tell you himself. And if he never could, Daniel's voice almost disappeared. Then I was supposed to give them to you. I looked down at the pages. You almost didn't. I know. I was wrong. His honesty surprised me. I thought protecting Tom meant keeping his promise. He shook his head. But watching you suffer? I realized protecting him shouldn't mean hurting you. I unfolded the first missing page. Thomas's familiar handwriting filled every line. My dearest Margaret, if you've reached this page, then you already know I kept a secret far too long. You deserve more than apologies. You deserve the truth. Tears blurred my vision before I reached the second paragraph. For years I believed I could wait until retirement. Then we'd sit together on the porch, and I'd tell you everything from beginning to end. I wanted to answer every question while looking into your eyes. Not through paper. I wiped away a tear and kept reading. I never hid this because I stopped trusting you. I hid it because I couldn't bear watching the pain it would place in your heart. I thought silence would protect you. Now I know silence only delayed the hurt. I looked at Daniel. He blamed himself. Daniel nodded quietly. He always did. I continued. Daniel wanted to tell you many times. I was the one who stopped him. Please don't punish him for keeping a promise I demanded he make. Those words hit me harder than anything else. For days I had accused Daniel of deception. Thomas himself had ordered the silence. I turned another page. You will probably wonder why I kept helping Ethan after he no longer needed financial support. The answer is simple. Because by then, he was no longer someone I felt responsible for. He had become someone I loved, like family. I covered my mouth. Family, not obligation. Family. The next lines explained the scholarship fund Ethan had mentioned. After Ethan stopped accepting money, we agreed every future payment would help students rebuilding their lives after catastrophic injuries. Daniel volunteered to contribute every month. Not because I asked him, because he insisted. I looked up slowly. Daniel stared at the table. I never knew. He smiled sadly. Tom never wanted credit. I thought, I know. He finished my sentence for me. You thought I was living off him? I did. I don't blame you. I do. He looked surprised. For 20 years, I judged you. You had reasons. No. I had assumptions. Silence filled the room. Then I returned to the final page. If you are reading this without me beside you, there is one last thing I need you to know. The accident was tragic. Lives changed forever. But I refused to let one terrible night create more victims. Not Daniel, not Ethan, not you. I believed people deserved the chance to become better than their worst mistake. Perhaps I was wrong to hide the truth, but I will never believe I was wrong to give grace. By the time I reached the signature, tears were running freely down my face. Forever yours, Tom. I folded the pages carefully. Neither Daniel nor I spoke for almost a minute. Finally, I asked the question that had remained in my heart. Why didn't you defend yourself? He looked confused. When I accused you? When I called you a liar? When I believed you'd stolen our money? His eyes became moist. Because Tom needed you to believe in him. Even if it meant hating me. I stared at him. You were willing to let me hate you. If it protected my brother. I suddenly remembered every small kindness from the past week. The lawn, the groceries, the broken gate, the muffins. None of them had been attempts to hide guilt. They had been the awkward efforts of a man trying to care for his brother's wife while carrying a promise that was crushing him. I owe you an apology. Daniel shook his head immediately. No? Yes. I judged you. You judged the man I used to be. I frowned. What do you mean? He smiled sadly. 25 years ago? You would have been right. I was selfish. I chased money. I disappointed everyone. I deserved your opinion. He looked toward the letter. But after that night, I spent the rest of my life trying to become someone Tom could be proud of. His voice cracked. I've never fully succeeded. I reached across the table without thinking. For the first time in 35 years, I placed my hand over Daniel's. You already have. He looked away quickly. I think he didn't want me to see him cry. As we sat there in silence, my phone rang. It was the hospital. Nurse Kelly sounded excited. Mrs. Wilson. Yes. Your husband is asking for you. He's remembering more. My heart leaped. What did he say? She laughed softly. The first thing he asked was, did Margaret read the rest of my letter? I looked down at the pages in front of me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I finally had every piece of the letter. Now, all that remained was telling Thomas I had finally read every word he had been too afraid to say. I don't remember driving to the hospital. Later, I couldn't have told you which streets I took or how many traffic lights I passed. All I remember is gripping Thomas's letter so tightly that the edges bent in my hands. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't carrying questions. I was carrying answers. But answers don't always make the pain disappear. Sometimes they simply change its shape. When I reached Thomas's room, he was awake. The afternoon sunlight spilled across his bed. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. The moment he saw me, he knew. "You read it." It wasn't a question. I nodded. Every page. His shoulders relaxed. For a second, he simply closed his eyes, almost as though he had been holding his breath for 21 years. "I'm sorry, Margaret." His voice cracked before he finished my name. "I know." "No." He shook his head weakly. "You know part of it." "I know enough." He reached for my hand. His fingers were still cold. "I never wanted you to find out this way." "I believe you." He stared at me, surprised. "You do?" "I've met Ethan." His eyes widened. "You met him?" "Yes. He told me about the visits. He showed me your letters." Thomas looked away. "I hoped he'd never have to." "I know." Silence settled between us. Not an angry silence. A heavy one, the kind that follows years of words left unsaid. Finally I spoke. "You should have trusted me." Those 6 words hung in the room. Thomas nodded immediately. "I know." "You didn't." "I know." "You decided for me?" "I did." "You carried this alone." "I thought I was protecting you." I took a slow breath. "You were protecting yourself too." He didn't argue, because he couldn't. "You were afraid." "Yes." "You were afraid I'd see you differently." "Yes." He squeezed my hand. I couldn't stand the thought of watching disappointment in your eyes. Tears filled mine. "Thomas, I've watched you believe I was an honest man every day of our marriage." "You were." "I hid the biggest truth of my life." "You hid it," I corrected softly. "You didn't stop being honest in everything else." He looked confused. I continued. "I've spent days asking myself whether I even knew my husband." "I know." "But now—" I paused. "I think I finally understand what happened." His eyes searched mine. "I don't agree with what you did. I wouldn't have made the same choice. I deserve to know." "You did. But I also understand why you believed silence was kindness." He began crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quiet tears sliding down his face. "I was so afraid." "I know." I kept telling myself. Next year. Then another year. Then retirement. I always believed there would be more time. His voice broke completely. There wasn't. I leaned forward and kissed his forehead. "There still is." He looked at me. "I haven't left." He laughed softly through his tears. "No. You haven't." For several minutes, we simply held hands. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, he whispered, "Did Daniel tell you everything?" "He gave me the missing pages." Thomas smiled faintly. "He finally ignored me." "Yes." "And I'm glad he did." Thomas nodded slowly. "So am I." That surprised me. "You are—" "I made him promise." "I know. But promises can become prisons." He stared toward the window. I kept both of us locked inside one. Those words stayed with me. A prison, not built with steel, built with guilt, built with love, built with fear. I reached into my purse. "I have something for you." I pulled out the old photograph. Thomas smiled the moment he saw it. I wondered where that ended up. "Ethan told me you stayed friends." "We did. He says you changed his life." Thomas laughed quietly. "He changed mine." I looked at him. "I don't understand." "When I first visited him, I expected him to hate me. Instead, he asked whether I'd recommend a history book." I smiled despite myself. That sounds like Ethan. Thomas nodded. That day I realized if he could rebuild his life, then maybe Daniel could too. There it was, the missing piece. You weren't only helping Ethan. No. You were helping Daniel become someone different. Yes. I finally understood. The money had never been about buying forgiveness. It had been about giving two young men the chance to build better futures. One had been injured. The other had been drowning in shame. Thomas refused to abandon either one. I still wish you'd told me. So do I. I hate that you carried this alone. So do I. I hate that I judged Daniel. So do I. His answers made me laugh softly. You agree with everything. I've had 21 years to think about my mistakes. That answer sounded exactly like him. We both laughed for the first time in days. It felt strange, almost unfamiliar. The room suddenly felt lighter. Then Thomas looked at me seriously. Can you forgive me? There it was. The question neither of us had wanted to ask. I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't know, because I wanted him to understand. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. I know. It isn't pretending this didn't hurt. I know. It isn't saying you were right. I know. I squeezed his hand. But I married a man who spent 21 years trying to make one terrible night leave fewer victims. I can't hate that man. Fresh tears filled his eyes. I love you, Margaret. I know. I've never stopped. I know. I almost lost you. Without telling you the truth. But you didn't. He smiled. No, I didn't. Just then, there was another knock at the door. Daniel stood outside. He looked uncertain. I can come back. Thomas looked at me. Instead of answering, I stood and walked toward the door. Then I did something I hadn't done in more than 30 years. I stepped aside. Come in, Daniel. He looked surprised. Very slowly, he entered the room. Thomas smiled at his younger brother. You finally gave her the letter. Daniel laughed quietly. Took me long enough? No, Thomas replied. It took all of us too long. For the first time since opening that forgotten safe, the three of us sat together. No secrets between us. Only truth. Only regret. And perhaps for the first time in many years, the beginning of healing. Thomas came home 3 weeks later. The doctors called it remarkable progress. I called it a second chance. He still tired easily. He still searched for words now and then. But he was home. That first evening felt strangely unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed inside the house, because everything inside me had. For years, I had believed our marriage rested on perfect honesty. Now, I knew something different. It rested on imperfect people who had loved each other enough to survive difficult truths. Thomas lowered himself carefully into his favorite chair, the same chair where he had collapsed only weeks before. He smiled. I never thought I'd miss this old thing. You always complained about that chair. I know. But it knows the shape of me. I laughed. So do I. He reached for my hand. I'm still getting used to hearing you laugh again. So am I. The silence between us no longer felt dangerous. It felt peaceful. Not because every wound had healed, because neither of us was hiding anymore. The next afternoon, Daniel came over. Not to fix something, not carrying groceries, just himself. He stopped on the porch. If this isn't a good time, Thomas interrupted him. Quit standing outside. You live here too. Daniel laughed awkwardly. I don't think Margaret would agree. I opened the front door wider. I might surprise you. He looked at me carefully. I could tell he still expected distance, suspicion, maybe even anger. Instead, I stepped aside. Come in. He entered slowly, almost like a guest visiting strangers. Thomas pointed toward the kitchen. I made coffee. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You... It only took me 3 tries. That made all 3 of us laugh. It was the first ordinary moment we'd shared in years. Later that afternoon, we sat on the back porch. 3 cups of coffee, 1 quiet neighborhood, children riding bicycles down the street, someone mowing a lawn nearby. Life had quietly resumed. Thomas looked toward his younger brother. I never thanked you. Daniel frowned. For what? For carrying my promise. Daniel shook his head. I nearly failed. You didn't. I almost kept hiding everything. Thomas smiled gently. But you didn't. Daniel looked at me. I owe you another apology. You already apologized. Not for everything. He folded his hands together. I let you think I was the same man I used to be. I answered honestly. I never gave you a chance to be anyone else. He smiled sadly. Maybe neither of us did. That sentence stayed with me. How often do we trap people inside old versions of themselves? I had spent decades looking at Daniel through memories from 30 years earlier. I never noticed the man he had become. A week later, Thomas surprised me. I want to go somewhere. Where? Westbrook High School. I immediately knew why. Ethan. We called ahead. He insisted we come after classes ended. When we arrived, students filled the hallways. Some waved at Ethan. Others stopped to ask questions about homework. He knew every one of them by name. Watching him teach felt strangely emotional. This was the young man I'd once imagined as nothing more than a victim. Now, I saw someone who inspired hundreds of teenagers every day. After school ended, Ethan led us into his classroom. History books lined every shelf. An American flag stood beside the whiteboard. Thomas smiled. You finally have more books than I do. Ethan laughed. Don't challenge me. Daniel quietly remained near the doorway. He looked uncomfortable. Ethan noticed immediately. You don't have to stand over there. Daniel hesitated. I've always felt like I should. Ethan walked across the room. Without saying another word, he hugged him. A real hug. Not awkward, not forced. Daniel froze, then slowly hugged him back. When they stepped apart, Daniel wiped his eyes. I'm sorry. He had probably spoken those words 1,000 times over 21 years. Ethan smiled. I know. I've been sorry every day. I know. I still think about that night. I know. Ethan rested a hand on Daniel's shoulder. And I've been thinking about every day after it. Daniel looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, one terrible night didn't define you? What defined you was everything you chose to do afterward. No courtroom could have delivered a greater sentence. No judge could have offered greater mercy. I looked toward Thomas. His eyes were filled with tears. As we prepared to leave, Ethan handed Thomas a framed photograph. Not the old one, a new one, taken only minutes earlier. The 4 of us standing together inside his classroom. You've got enough old memories. Ethan smiled. I think it's time you made a new one. Thomas accepted the frame with trembling hands. I'll treasure it. I know. Driving home, none of us spoke for several miles. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. You know, I've never forgiven myself. Thomas looked out the window. You may never completely. Daniel nodded. I probably won't. But Ethan has. And Margaret has. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. I don't know why. I smiled softly. Because forgiveness isn't saying nothing happened. It's deciding that what happened doesn't get the final word. Daniel looked away quickly. I think he was crying again. That evening, after Daniel left, Thomas and I sat together watching the sunset. He leaned his head against mine. I've been thinking. That's dangerous. He laughed. It usually is. I spent 21 years believing secrets protected people. I waited. I was wrong. I looked at him. No. You were partly wrong. What do you mean, your love protected people? Your silence didn't. He nodded slowly. I think that's the lesson. It is. He squeezed my hand. Thank you for staying. I smiled. I never promised to stay only through the easy years. Autumn arrived quietly that year. The maple tree in our front yard turned brilliant shades of red and gold. For the first time in weeks, I found myself noticing ordinary things again. The smell of fresh coffee, the sound of rain against the windows, Thomas humming while reading the newspaper. Life hadn't returned to what it used to be. It had become something different, something more honest. Thomas's strength improved every week. His memory wasn't perfect, but enough of it had returned. Sometimes we'd sit together on the porch after dinner. He would suddenly remember a tiny detail from years ago, the color of Ethan's first bicycle, the restaurant where Daniel celebrated his first steady job, the fishing trip they took after Ethan finished physical therapy. Each memory reminded me how much of my husband's life I had never seen. Not because he wanted another life, because he had been quietly helping other people rebuild theirs. One Saturday morning, I found Thomas in the garage. He was holding an old toolbox. What are you doing? He smiled. Looking for something. What? The spare key. To what? He laughed. The safe. I froze. For a brief second, every painful memory returned. The open door, the hidden papers, the unfinished letter. Thomas noticed my expression immediately. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize every time someone says the word safe. I know, but I still want to. He walked over and gently took my hand. I'd like to put something new inside it. I looked at him curiously. What? He opened the toolbox. Inside was the framed photograph Ethan had given us. The four of us standing together. Smiling. No secrets. No fear. I think this belongs there now. I smiled. I think you're right. Together we opened the safe. This time, there were no hidden envelopes, no mysterious transfers, no unfinished letters, only ordinary family papers, insurance policies, birth certificates, retirement documents. Thomas carefully placed the photograph on the top shelf. Then he closed the door, without locking it. I noticed immediately. So, I said softly, no more secrets. He smiled. No more secrets. A few weeks later, Daniel called. I need your opinion. My opinion? Yes, that sounds dangerous. He laughed. It probably is. He asked us to meet him at a small building downtown. When we arrived, Ethan was already there. So, I looked around. What is this place? Daniel looked nervous. I bought it. I blinked. You bought a building. A small one? What for? He smiled sheepishly. I've been saving. Thomas laughed. I can hardly believe I just heard those words. Daniel rolled his eyes. I deserve that. Then he unlocked the front door. Inside was a bright, empty space with fresh paint and new floors. "What do you think?" I looked around. "It looks wonderful." "But what is it?" Daniel glanced toward Ethan, then back at us. "A learning center." I frowned. "For who?" "For students recovering after serious injuries." My eyes filled immediately. "Ethan's scholarship fund has helped dozens of kids," Daniel continued. "But some of them need tutoring too." Ethan agreed to help. Ethan smiled, and Daniel insisted on paying for the building. I looked at Daniel. "You did this." He shrugged awkwardly. "I spent enough years taking. I'd like to spend the rest giving." I walked across the room. Without thinking, I hugged him. For years I had imagined that moment differently. I thought if I ever hugged Daniel, it would be because Thomas asked me to. Instead, I hugged him because I wanted to. "I'm proud of you." He laughed quietly. "Margaret, I've waited 30 years to hear you say something like that." "So have I." Thomas walked over and wrapped one arm around his younger brother. "I always knew you'd get here." Daniel smiled. "You just got tired of waiting." "Maybe." The three of us laughed together. Months passed. Christmas arrived. For the first time in many years, our daughter came home with her family. Daniel joined us for dinner. Not as a guest, as family. At one point, my granddaughter whispered, "Grandma, is Uncle Daniel really Grandpa's brother?" "Yes." "They laugh like best friends." I looked across the room. Thomas and Daniel were arguing over a football game, both smiling, both laughing. "They are." She smiled. "I like that." "So do I." After dinner, Thomas asked everyone to stay seated. "I've got something." He disappeared into the living room. When he returned, he carried a small wooden box. He handed it to me. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside was a tiny silver key. "The safe." He nodded. "It's yours." I looked confused. "It was always ours." "I know, but I spent too many years acting like it belonged only to me." He smiled gently. "Never again." I slipped the key into my pocket. "I'll keep it." "I know. But honestly," I looked at him, "I don't think I'll ever need it." He smiled. "Why, because now, if I want to know something, I'll simply ask." Everyone laughed. Later that night, after our family had gone home, Thomas and I stood on the back porch, watching snow begin to fall. He wrapped a blanket around both of us. "You know, I still think about that day. The ambulance." He nodded. "I told you to trust Daniel." "You did." "I wondered if you'd ever understand." I leaned my head against his shoulder. "I didn't. Not then. But now." I smiled toward the softly falling snow. "Now I understand you weren't asking me to trust your brother. I think you were asking me to trust the goodness you still saw in people." Thomas kissed the top of my head. "Exactly. People sometimes ask me whether I still think about the safe. The answer is yes, but not for the reason you might imagine. For a long time, I believed that little steel box held the secret that almost destroyed my marriage. Now, I know the truth. It never held money. It never held betrayal. It held fear. Fear that honesty would cost someone they loved. Fear that one terrible mistake would define an entire family. Fear that forgiveness might never come. Almost a year has passed since Thomas came home from the hospital. Life isn't perfect. It never will be. His memory still slips now and then. He occasionally forgets where he leaves his reading glasses. Sometimes he tells me the same story twice. I never interrupt. After nearly losing him, I don't mind hearing the same story again, especially when I know I still have the chance to hear it. One warm spring afternoon, Thomas and I drove to the scholarship ceremony Ethan had organized. The learning center Daniel purchased had become something remarkable. Students filled the classrooms. Volunteers tutored teenagers recovering from serious accidents, illnesses, and surgeries. Parents sat together drinking coffee while waiting for their children. The building felt alive. Hope has a sound. It sounds like laughter echoing through hallways. Daniel met us at the entrance. He wore a simple blue polo shirt with the Learning Center's logo stitched above the pocket. He looked comfortable, confident, peaceful. A version of him I never thought I'd see. "You made it." Thomas smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." Inside the auditorium, Ethan stepped onto the stage. He welcomed everyone with the calm confidence of a teacher who loved his work. Then he surprised us. "I'd like to recognize 2 people." Thomas immediately looked uncomfortable. "Oh no," he whispered to me. "I know that face." I laughed quietly. "You can't hide now." Ethan continued speaking. "Many of you know this scholarship exists because of donations. What you may not know is that it began because 2 brothers refused to let one terrible night become the end of someone else's future." The room became silent. Thomas lowered his head. Daniel looked equally uncomfortable. Ethan invited both of them to stand. Neither wanted to. The audience applauded anyway, long, warm, sincere. Not because they knew every detail, because they recognized quiet kindness. After the ceremony, dozens of students came forward. One young woman walked directly toward Thomas. She couldn't have been older than 18. She held a small envelope. "I wanted you to have this." Thomas looked confused. "What is it?" "A letter." He smiled. "I've written enough letters for one lifetime." She laughed. "But maybe it's time someone wrote one to you." He carefully opened it as he read, his eyes filled with tears. Later, when we were alone, he handed it to me. It read, "Dear Mr. Wilson, you don't know me very well, but your scholarship helped me return to school after my accident. Next month, I'll be the first person in my family to attend college. Thank you for believing someone you had never met deserved another chance. I hope one day I can give someone else the same gift." I folded the letter carefully. It reminded me so much of Thomas's own handwriting. Quiet, honest, full of hope. Driving home that evening, I looked over at my husband. "What are you thinking?" He smiled. "I'm thinking that maybe something good finally grew from all that pain." "I think so too." A few weeks later, our daughter and grandchildren came to visit again. We gathered around the dining room table for Sunday dinner. Daniel arrived carrying homemade peach pie. "I actually baked this myself." Everyone laughed. Thomas looked suspicious. "Should we call poison control first?" Daniel rolled his eyes. "I've improved." Our grandchildren couldn't stop laughing. Watching the 2 brothers tease each other felt strangely healing. Not because the past had disappeared, because it no longer controlled the present. As dinner ended, I noticed one empty chair beside mine. Without thinking, I looked toward Daniel. "Sit here." He looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He sat beside me. Such a small moment. Just one chair. Yet somehow it erased decades of distance. That night, after everyone left, I walked into our bedroom. The safe still stood behind the winter coats. I opened it one last time. Inside were ordinary papers, the family photograph, and one new envelope. Thomas walked in behind me. I added something. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Nothing more. At the top, he had written, For Margaret. I smiled. You wrote me another letter. No. What is it? I read the single sentence. There are no more secrets left inside this house. I looked up. He smiled. I wanted that to be the last thing ever placed in the safe. I folded the page and returned it carefully. Then I closed the safe. This time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. People often think trust means knowing everything. I used to believe that too. Now I believe something different. Trust isn't built because someone has never made a mistake. It's built because when the truth finally comes into the light, love is strong enough to face it. If I learned anything from opening that forgotten safe, it wasn't about hidden money. It wasn't about missing letters. It wasn't even about old secrets. It was about this. A single night can change a life, but it does not have to define one. And sometimes, the greatest thing locked inside a safe isn't a fortune. It's the courage to finally unlock your heart. If this journey taught me anything, it's that love and trust are not the same thing, and both require courage. For a long time, I believed trust meant knowing everything about the person you married. I thought that if there were no secrets, there could be no pain. But life is rarely that simple. Thomas made a mistake by keeping the truth from me. No matter how loving his intentions were, silence still hurt. It left room for fierce suspicion and misunderstandings that nearly destroyed the family he was trying to protect. At the same time, I learned that people should not be judged only by the worst day of their lives. Daniel spent more than 20 years trying to become a better man. Ethan chose forgiveness over bitterness. And Thomas spent decades quietly helping others because he believed one terrible moment should never be the final chapter of someone's story. Forgiveness did not erase the past. It did not pretend the pain never happened. Instead, it allowed us to stop living inside that pain. Healing began the moment we chose honesty over fear and compassion over resentment. Looking back now, I no longer think about the safe as the place where my marriage almost ended. I think of it as the place where I finally discovered what real love looks like. Real love tells the truth. Real love accepts responsibility. Real love gives people the chance to grow. And real love believes that even broken families can find their way home when they choose grace over pride. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you for sharing this journey with my family. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. If you were in my place, could you have forgiven Thomas? Could you have forgiven Daniel? Or would the secret have been too much to overcome? Please share your thoughts and your own experiences in the comments. I read every one of them, and your stories may encourage someone else who needs hope today. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more emotional family stories that remind us how powerful forgiveness, love, and second chances can be. Thank you for spending your time with me. Wherever you are in the world, I hope peace finds your home, and I hope you never stop believing that even after the hardest seasons, healing is still possible.